All right, class. Hello, and welcome to our discussion of 10 ways to think about writing, section 8. Now, I know this, strictly speaking, isn't on the syllabus. I think that only goes up to section 7 getting covered. But I like to cover section 8 personally, and I find it one of the first things I like to have covered. The reason for that is it involves reading skills that you can then take to any of the other readings you do in this class or other classes. So even before you get to section 1, setting up your reading skills so you can be a better reader, that's something that you can take even to the beginning of this essay, even though the advice on how to read this essay, or any essay really, is 8 sections deep. And so like I said, this wasn't on the syllabus, so this wasn't required for you to read. I still want to cover it because this can be really helpful information for students. So read is going to start off, well, first, the title of the section is Hey, 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 and the Textbook Conspiracy, Annotating Your Reading. And that is what this section is all about, annotation, which just means you're taking notes on the thing you're reading, often directly on the thing you're reading. So, like writing in a book, writing in a textbook, in this case, highlighting a PDF file. So, Reed is going to start off here and she's going to say, part of being a writer, being a helpful companion to other writers, is being a careful reader, a reader who writes. And this is something I take just to be true, that the better reader you are, the better writer you're going to be. And so, if you are reading more broadly, you're exposed to more sort of interesting ways of phrasing sentences, interesting ways of constructing paragraphs. You're going to ultimately internalize all that stuff, and you're going to be able to bring that to your own writing. Although that's not really what we're talking about when we're talking about annotating. You can annotate for content, which is what she wants to do here, but you can also annotate for structure, which is what we're, not really discussing. We'll see that more. I don't know if Mike Bunn is on the syllabus. That's a fantastic reading. If I'm still around, we'll probably cover that at some point. But what we want here is to take notes to get the best information we can out of whatever it is we're reading, so we don't have to go back and keep referring to it. We don't have to go back and keep rereading things in order to get the information out of our textbook that we need to be getting out of it. And so that just involves going through your textbook, finding the important notes that people are trying to make, and writing on the textbook itself, underlining things, highlighting things in various ways, and stuff like that. So Reed is going to say here, did you know that you pay for your textbooks? For most textbooks in 2 ways, and most students never do the simplest thing to recoup their investment. Now, I've got that highlighted in particular because that is a signal to me as a reader. Did you know that you pay for most textbooks in 2 ways? In particular, this phrase 2 ways right here. That suggests to me that if the author is being a good author and doing their job, they're going to follow up on what those 2 ways are. So I've got a signal that says, okay, I'm paying for my textbooks in 2 ways. Now I just got to look for what those 2 ways are. First, she notes that you're paying some ridiculous price at the bookstore. Like, I seem to recall that my math or science textbooks are easily over like a couple $100 each. And, you try and sell them back used for whatever you can get for them. But textbooks can be very expensive. If we skip down a little bit, she says, second, you pay for the book, even a free one like this that you're reading here, with your time. So if you read something once and you don't take good notes on it, and then that means you have to go back and reread that entire chapter or entire section in the textbook again, not only are you paying with your time once for having read it the first time, you're paying your time a second time for needing to read it the second time around, because maybe you're studying for a test, maybe you have to go through it again for a third time because you're studying for the final or whatever it is. But that's really the more important cost here, is the way you pay with your time. And the idea is by taking notes, you can cut down on having to go back and reread things and reread things. I will note, I do believe I've seen research that basically states that if you do take notes, particularly by hand, you are far more likely to remember whatever it is than if you didn't take notes in the first place. Even if you never go back and look at your notes again, you're more likely to remember things. So that's really what we're concerned with, is saving our time. Like, books are expensive, sure, but time is finite. You don't really get it back, and you don't want to have to reread the same section of a chemistry textbook 2, 3, 4 times over the span of a semester, when really you could write on it and know what the information was you needed from it. Now, so I've taught E. Shelley Reid 10 Ways to Think About Writing pretty extensively, basically every semester since I started teaching in 2016, and I don't go back and reread word by word, line by line, every section before teaching it again. I don't have to do that because I've got my notes. Now, this bit of highlighting here, that's not good annotating, and Reid's going to talk about why that is in a minute. I've got some examples of why that is. But I can show you, hold on one second. This is my personal copy of this. One, I printed it out, and I encourage you, if you want to take notes on something, to print it out and actually do handwrite on it. But you can see I've got a bunch of stuff going on here. One, I've got some things underlined. I've got some things underlined with brackets around them. I've got some things circled. I've got some things with little stars out on the side. This is just my personal system that means things to me. I encourage you to start doing your note-taking now to discover what works for you. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, Mr. Shoemaker, we don't really need to do this in this class. These readings are short. We're not going to have to... Hold on. There we go. We're not going to have to really take notes on these. These are like 2-page readings. The concepts are pretty simple. We don't have to go this far into it. And you might actually be right. But these, one of the things that I think about 1010 or 1011 or even 1020 to some extent is this is the point to start A, discovering what works for us as writers and readers, and B, begin building those good habits so we have them when we really need them. Do you need to extensively annotate Section 8 of 10 Ways to Think About Writing? Probably not. Not to remember what is being said here. Can annotating Section 8 of 10 Ways to Think About Writing help you discover how you best take notes on things? Yes, it can start that process right now. And so in your junior year, when you're looking at more complicated textbooks, where the information is a lot more dense, your paragraphs are a lot more dense, you already have a system in place. You don't have to try and develop it then. But by just looking at this with my system, I can see that, all right, I got 2 stars by something. This was really important. So down here in this one paragraph, simplest thing you could do to get your money's worth, your time's worth, you can write on them. That's the important thing for Reid. That's the point she's really trying to make. I put little stars by it because that's something critical she's trying to say. Now, typically I will sign something like that because I think, if I identify what the author thinks is important, I try and note that. Sometimes down here where she says, like, if you don't write in the book, you're being cheated, that felt more important to me, so I'll circle that and I'll write a bunch of notes out on the side. But these notes out on the side also help me remember what I thought about things at the time. So, for example, Reid says the only 2 benefits you get for buying a textbook are convenient reading access and a chance to write in the book. And that doesn't seem right to me, because sometimes it's not just convenient reading access. Sometimes it's access in the first place. Sometimes there are other things going on. It feels like there's going to be more than 2 things going on there. So in this case, I've already noted to myself, oh, Reid says this thing, I don't agree with it, and here's kind of why I don't agree with it. Or, other little notes and things here or there, like, oh, the skills of reading and writing are linked. Developing one helps develop the other. Down here, some of you may think you are writing in your text, but I wonder if that's true, which suggests there's good and bad ways of doing this. So other sorts of implications, my personal thoughts, my personal understanding of the reading. I've got all of that right here, so I don't have to sit down and reread this again as if I'm seeing it for the first time. Now, when Reed gets to the bottom here and she says, some of you may think you are writing on your text, but I wonder if that's true. She goes on to say, smearing it with hot pink highlighter pen doesn't count as writing in it. So why is that? Well, because if you highlight something, all you're telling your future self who's going to come back and look at this is, hey, hey, hey. Hey, this was important. And that's it. And there's no necessarily context behind it. It all looks the same. So if I zoom up here, back to my first page, I've got a bunch of different stuff highlighted. And at first glance, if you didn't know why I highlighted something, then it all looks equally important, which is an issue. Because if I come back to this, instead of my written page, if I came back to this, I was like, okay, I taught this last semester. What did I think was important? What did I highlight? Well, much like when I wrote on it, I did things for different reasons. So the part I disagreed with, I highlighted that because that jumps out to me as a good example of, hey, I don't agree with this. Students, you don't always have to agree with the readings as well. Be on the lookout for things that maybe you disagree with and note those. Or, oh, you can write on those books. That's kind of so critical. It's like, okay, that's an important point. This thing up here is an important point. I also have the double-crossing elf, what he deserves in World of Warcraft highlighted because that stands out to me as Reed trying too hard to be humorous. And that reference is also significantly dated. Like the article was written, I think in like 2009-ish. I'd have to go scroll up and check, and I don't really feel like doing that. Back when World of Warcraft was a much bigger deal than it was, and this was still even kind of like, meh, something to say at that time. So I have this highlighted as a, hey students, don't shove random references into your work. Look at this reading we've got, which is now like 15 years out of popular date. So I highlighted this as an example of what not to do in your writing. But at first glance, if I didn't tell you all that kind of stuff, it all looks the same. So when you highlight something, you come back to it in the future. If all you have is little bits of highlighting and it's all in the same color, and you haven't written out anything in the side, you haven't like done any other annotation, all your future self is going to do is look at that and be like, okay, I've got all the highlighted text. I guess I got to read all that again. And for something like a reading this short, this isn't a lot of highlighting, but if you're thinking about something like a history textbook where you might have a whole page and a half highlighted, now you got to go read that whole page and a half again. Or like a biology textbook or a chemistry textbook where it's like, okay, this entire 2.5 pages is so important. I need all of it. I've got to highlight it all. Well, that doesn't actually really help you a lot. It just tells future you, hey, this was important. And that, while marginally useful, so you don't have to skim the reading again to find the important stuff, doesn't tell you why it was important. You don't have any handwritten notes reminding you what the topics were or anything like that. Just highlighting is not sufficient. So Reed's going to say that what you should be doing is even single words of annotation here. Like if you highlight something and you go, whoa, and you just write that at the side of it. Out at the side of the highlighting, then that lets you know, okay, I thought this was really cool. Or out on the side of a piece of text, if you go, huh? That lets you know, okay, I thought this was confusing for some reason or another. And maybe if you come back to something weeks later, after weeks of class, you go, okay, I understand this now, actually. So you could see what you thought about things at the time. And to me, I've had this brought up by students before. That doesn't mean that highlighting can't work. Just have a system involving multiple colors, because you can do that. Like, oh, if it's exciting to me and interesting, I'll highlight it in purple. If it's confusing to me, I'll highlight it in orange. If it's general information that seems neat, I'll use yellow. If it's the critical point, I'll use green. You can build a system that tells you things using colors the same way we could tell each other things using words, but you have to actively figure out what you're doing and why you're doing it. You start discovering that now. Practice on this very reading. So if we go back to this, so one of the things you might notice about a lot of textbooks or about academic readings is massive margins out on the sides. If you print this out, you're going to have like inches of margin out on the side. Your textbooks have inches of margins on every page. This is not because the publisher just found it difficult to fill the space. That blank space is there because academic readers have the expectation that they will be given space in order to take their notes. So, one, you've paid AUM printing fees, go print stuff out, print out this reading, start working on your highlighter system or your underlining system or your side note taking or whatever, and start working on discovering what works for you now. Something else Reed's going to note right here. Like, this is an experience I've had, certainly, and I don't know if you've had it too, but sometimes I'll be reading along things for class or, whatever it is, and I'll start getting tired, and my mind starts to wander, and I realize I've read the same paragraph 2 or 3 times, and I'm just not retaining any of it. If you read with a pencil or a pen in your hand, pencil is what I recommend because you can erase mistakes and all that. Or I guess highlighter if you're into highlighting. If you read actively because you're underlining and you're noting things and you're writing things out on the side, you stay much more focused. You get a lot more out of your reading than you otherwise would if you just weren't doing that. So that's what this is all about is, okay, we can take good notes and be better readers, and that will ultimately make us better writers. But importantly for you guys, as college students, it will mean you are getting the best information out of your textbooks that you can in a way where you don't have to go back and reread them later and ultimately keep wasting or spending, I won't say wasting, spending your time multiple times on a particular reading. So that's why I personally like to start with 8. I know it wasn't assigned, but I am going to cover it real briefly for you before moving on to section 1. So I will see you in the E. Shelley Reed 10 Ways to Think About Writing section 1 video.